Hey, today I'm going to be changing the front rotors and brake pads on a 2008 Town & Country. Before you jack up the vehicle, you want to use a 19mm socket along with a breaker bar and just loosen each lug nut. Just break the hold on it, but don't take the nut off all the way. I broke all the hold of the lug nuts with my 19mm socket and breaker bar. I did the driver's side lug nuts and also the passenger side lug nuts. I also put a wheel chock behind the driver's side rear tire and behind the passenger side rear tire, so when you jack up the vehicle, it'll prevent it from rolling. Now, before you jack up your vehicle, just make sure you have no pets roaming around or small children or elderly people who might be coming over to see what you're doing. Just always think safety first. And sorry, as a side note, you might want to open your hood before you jack up the vehicle, because when you're compressing the piston on your caliper, you want to have access to your brake fluid reservoir. So just keep that in mind. You might want to pop your hood before you jack up the van. When I'm doing my front brake pads and rotors, I prefer jacking the front of the vehicle up so both front ends are off the ground. It just saves a little bit of time, but if you're more comfortable just doing one side at a time, that's fine as well. But in either case, after you jack up the vehicle a few strokes, you want to go back and check your wheel chocks and make sure that they haven't slidden out. And before you start doing the work all together, just give it one final look and make sure these are under the tires in the rear. If you're not sure where your jack points are under your vehicle, check your owner's manual. That'll have the information in there. Okay, I jacked up the vehicle. I have 2 jack stands under the vehicle supporting it. As I said, if you're more comfortable just doing one side at a time, that's fine. You would just use one jack stand, but make sure you use a jack stand. Do not just rely on the floor jack, because if that fails, you get seriously hurt. Alright, I'm just going to lower the vehicle onto the jack stands. Let me see if I can do it like this. Okay, what I did is I lowered the jack so the vehicle is sitting on the jack stands. I used the floor jack just to give a little support. There's barely any tension on the floor jack, but just in case one of the jack stands fails, you have a backup here with the floor jack. But as I said, make sure you use at least one jack stand when you're jacking up your vehicle. You can do this job with just basic hand tools. If you have air tools, by all means use them. I'm just going to use this 19mm socket and a ratchet and just take off the lug nuts off the driver's side. Got all the lug nuts off, remove the tire, and I put the tire under the vehicle on the driver's side, just under the driver's side door. Alright, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go inside the vehicle, and being I'm doing the driver's side first, I'm going to turn the steering wheel to the left. So basically the tire, or the rotor and the caliper will come out this way a little bit, which makes it easier to access the nuts on the back. Okay, you don't have to start the car. Just turn the key to the on position and then just turn the wheel And there we go. And don't forget to turn off the car. That makes it a lot easier, so it's a lot more accessible over here with the wheel turned. And then when you go to do the passenger side later, you will turn the steering wheel to the right. Okay, I have a 14mm socket that you put on this nut, and then a 15mm open-ended wrench that you're going to hold on to this nut on the inside of the caliper and just loosen that up, and then you can remove the the bolt with your fingers, and it comes right out. Just to give you a better camera angle, this bolt that I just took out was up here, and the 15mm wrench I used went right here. So just to give you a better perspective, my camera angle wasn't very good there. So just loosen that up, take it out, and then we're going to repeat for the bottom. Okay, now I'm going to do the same thing for the bottom bolt. I'm going to use my 15mm wrench and my 14mm socket, and we're going to take this one off. When you take the caliper off, it's a little bit heavy. There's a brake line here. You don't want to just drop the caliper to the ground because you'll damage the brake line, and that's another headache. So make sure you have a firm grip on this caliper when you're taking it off. What I did was I used a bungee cord up around the strut spring, and I'm just going to hang the caliper to the bungee cord to take pressure off that line, that brake line. Just to give you a better view, I have the bungee cord hooked to each hole where I took each nut out of the caliper, so it's hanging from the bungee cord, which is wrapped around the spring on the strut. Okay, so that's right above the rotor, right up here, and there's no pressure or stress on the brake line. Now where we took the caliper off, the bolt, the top bolt was up here, the bottom bolt was down here through the caliper. These pins are supposed to have a play in them, both pins, the upper and the lower, into the caliper bracket. We're going to take these out in a minute and put some lubricant on them just to make sure that they move freely, because you don't want these jamming up on you. Just another tip, if this is the first time you're doing your brakes, or second or third time, and you're still becoming familiar with it, now's a good time. You might want to take out a cell phone and just take a picture of the way the brake pads are seated, the way the clips are, how they look over here and over here. And as you can see, there's not much meat left at all on these, so they were well overdue to be changed. And the rotors have some gouges on them, so that's why we're swapping those out as well. So we're just going to pop out the old pads, and if you note, the rounded edge faces the front of the vehicle, and the same thing on the inner one. Now for the caliper bracket, to get that off, which enables you to change your rotor. If you were just doing your brake pads, you could just put your new pads in, lubricate these pins up, and put it back together. But if you're changing your rotors, you want to take off the caliper bracket. It has these two big bolts, one on the bottom, one on the top. You're going to use a 21mm socket with a breaker bar, and we'll loosen these up. There we go. And we'll do the bottom one next. Okay, now the bottom one is loosened up. Take that out, and the caliper bracket will come right out. And just make a note, there are little clips in here. There's 4 clips which hold the brake pads in. So now's a good time to take your camera and just take a picture, just so you know the way they seat. So when you go to put the new ones on, you put them on correctly. Now with the caliper bracket off, you can remove your rotor. Sometimes they get stuck from rust. This one's moving off freely, which is good, but in case yours is stuck, you can use a rubber mallet and just tap the rotor. Just be careful not to hit the studs, and that should get it off for you. Okay, now with the rotor removed, now's the time you want to either take a basin. I prefer a basin. It's lower to the floor. You can use a bucket if you want, but we want to remove all the rust off of here. You're going to use a wire brush, whichever one works best for you, and we're just going to scrape off all the rust on the hub here, just so when we put the new rotor on, it's got a nice clean surface. Okay, now we're just going to start using our wire brush to get all this rust off. It's a good idea. If you have safety glasses, use them. You don't want something getting in your eye. So we'll get all around here. Okay, now this is fairly cleaned off. There's no ridges or rough surface on here at all. And now you're just going to take some brake cleaner and spray this down. And don't forget to have a basin or a bucket underneath to catch it. Before we clean off our caliper bracket, it's a good idea if you take the clips out and just line them up the way they were in. This way when you go to put it back with the new hardware, you know the way they're supposed to look. Okay, so now we're just going to clean off the caliper bracket. Okay, with our caliper bracket, you can put it inside your basin, and you're just going to use your wire brush and just brush the heck out of it. Make sure you get in the holder where the brackets go, all 4 of them, and we're going to scrub that down really well. And after we clean this off, we're going to spray it down with brake cleaner. Okay, now the brake caliper is brushed down with the wire brush pretty well. You just want to take care with these rubber boots that you know, you don't hit it with the wire brush. And now we're just going to take our brake cleaner and spray it down really well. Turn it over. Okay, these are the brake rotors I got. There's another one in the box here. I got both rotors. and the set of brake pads, 2 sets, off of Amazon. With tax and everything, it came to $104. So you think just by doing this job yourself, you wind up saving well over $300, as opposed to bringing it to a shop. The brake pads, make sure you get a set that come with the hardware. And now what we're going to do, we're going to take our brake cleaner and spray down the rotors, and then wipe it down with either toweling or a rag. When these things are sitting on the shelf, they put a film on it to prevent it from rusting while it's being stored. So we want to do both sides and get that film off. Now we'll just give it a real good wipe down. And you can see what's on there. And then we're going to flip it over and do the other side. Spray it down with brake cleaner. And give it a good wipe down. And then when we're done with this one, make sure you do your other rotor and just repeat the same thing. Okay, now we're going to take our rotor and set it on the hub. What you can do is take a lug nut or two and just finger tighten it on, just to prevent it from leaning forward. Okay, that seems good. Okay, now we're going to take our caliper bracket and put it back on. And we're going to get those two 21mm bolts that we took out, that we're holding the caliper bracket on. And we're going to use some thread locker. Some thread locker, and we're going to put it on both of these bolts. This way it'll be on there nice and secure. And you can just finger tighten this on. And then we'll put some thread locker on the second bolt. Okay, both of these 21mm bolts for the caliper bracket have to be torqued. Okay, now that we got the caliper bracket back on and the bolts torqued to the correct specifications, 125 foot-pounds each, we're going to take off the caliper that's hanging up on the spring. We're just going to take that off very carefully, and just be mindful of the brake line here. You don't want to kink it, or you don't want to put too, excessive weight on it. Okay, carefully remove the caliper that was hanging up here, and I put it down on top of the rotor. You want to take some brake cleaner and a paper towel and spray some brake cleaner on the paper towel. And then we're going to just wipe down the outside of the piston just to clean it off, and this will help give this some extra life. You want to do this before you compress it so all that dirt and gunk doesn't get sucked in. Alright, now we have our compressor tool all set up here, our old brake pad up against the piston, and we're just going to turn it clockwise. It's kind of hard to do with one hand. You'll feel a little bit of resistance, and we'll just take a look up here, make sure it's not overflowing. And once it gets relatively hard to turn, then you can stop and loosen it up. Alright, I think we're almost there. The whole idea with this is once your pads wear down, the piston expands to give a grip on the rotor for the pads. So when you have old pads that are worn down, you have to compress the piston back in. Alright, now we can loosen it up. Just to give you a better view, the piston is in there, and once it gets pushed all the way back in, when you can't turn anymore, you don't want to force it. That means that's as far as it's going to go, so you can loosen it up. Okay, now that the caliper is, the piston is compressed, you want to lay out your hardware. It came with 8 clips. That's why it's important when you take off the old hardware, you line them up when you take them off where they were on the caliper. Remember, we had the caliper over here before. So you want to just line up the new hardware to make sure this has the recess in the outer edge, like this one. This one has the recess on the outer edge on this side, and so on. So we're just going to place those in the same way. Okay. Got the first clip on. It has this inner clip that you want to get on. You want to get that on first, and then push it down so it seats correctly. I don't know if you can see that. Right in here, and then we'll do the 2 upper ones as well. Now that the hardware is in all 4 clips, we're going to use some copper anti-seize on this. You don't have to use a lot. You just want to put a little bit inside the hardware. Just make sure you don't get it on the rotor. Same thing for the upper one. And the inners. Alright. Okay, now we're also going to take some of this copper lubricant and we're going to put it on the outer edge of the brake pad. Not the inner edge, the outer edge. And you're just going to put a thin layer on here. You don't have to do a lot, but just get a good coating on there. And then you can seat this brake pad on in. Easier said than done. There we go. Alright, just remember the rounded edge goes towards the front of the vehicle. And then we're going to do the same thing for the other pad on the outer edge. Just a nice thin coating. Okay, and then we'll put this on. Rounded edge towards the front. Alright, there we go. We got both on, both brake pads. They fit well. You can see the difference in the meat that's on the new one compared to what we took off. There was virtually none left on that. Okay, now we're going to take a look at our two guide pins. There's one up here and one down here, and it sits in this rubber boot. You want to take it out and just get a piece of toweling and just wipe it off. Get all that dirt off. And then what we want to use after you wipe it down is some silicone paste. And you just want to lubricate this up well. You want these pins to move freely within the caliper. Just get a nice good coating on there and then reinsert it. And then we're going to do the same thing for the bottom one. Okay, now we have these nice and greased up, the caliper pins. Now we're going to take our caliper and put it back on here. Just remember it's heavy. You might have to push the pin with your finger a little bit to get the caliper to sit correctly. And with our bolts, just want to take some thread locker, and sorry I can't show you what I'm doing, but I'll show you the end result here. Just want to take some of that thread locker and put it on the bolt, and then reinsert the bolt into the guide pin. Finger tighten it down. Okay. And then put some thread locker on the second bolt. Okay. And we'll reinsert that in the bottom guide pin. And finger tighten that down as well. Okay, we have to torque these bolts down. So we'll get our torque wrench. Okay, now we're going to take our 14mm socket and our torque bar, and you want to use your wrench to hold it, because that would be a good idea. Okay. Okay. Now everything is torqued, so we can remove this lug nut that we put on before. And then what we can do is go back in the vehicle, turn it to the on position, and straighten out the wheel. Okay, now with the wheels straight, we're going to get the tire and put the tire back on. Just remember, when you're putting your wheel cover on, make sure you line it up so the air valve is lined up with the opening on the wheel cover. And I'm just going to put the rest of the lug nuts on, finger tighten them, and just tighten it just a little bit with the ratchet. But when you're all done, don't forget to put your cap back on your brake fluid reservoir and make sure it's on there snug. And if you left any tools or anything in the engine bay, make sure you clean them out as well. Now, something else, when you're all done, when you get in your vehicle, you want to push down the brake 3 or 4 times, nice and steady, nice and easy. You should feel a little pressure. And after you feel that pressure, you want to bed your brakes, or braking in your brakes. I have a video, I'll put a link in, and you can see how you bed your brakes. Okay, this tire is on. I just used the ratchet just to tighten these lug nuts just a little bit. Whenever you're doing your front pads and rotors, you always have to do them in a pair. So now I'm going to proceed to the other side, but I'm not going to videotape it. You have the idea of how to do it. It's not a terribly hard job. It's relatively easy. Sorry about the helicopter. Just think, you saved yourself a few $100 by doing this yourself, and you have the satisfaction that you did it yourself and you know you did it right. So thanks for watching. If I helped you, give me a thumbs up and subscribe if you wouldn't mind. Thanks, have a great day, see you in the next video.